Welcome to office hours, everyone. Here we are, October, at least here in the US. It's a nice fall day. Hopefully nice wherever everyone else is, too. Starting off with announcements and highlights. I don't think I have any announcements or highlights. Still haven't heard about any 5.0 bugs. Anyone else for announcements or highlights?
I heard a vague report that some Windows hosts went offline after an update to 5.0.1. They told me they thought it was a permissions issue, but didn't have any evidence to show me to indicate that. So still in the very, very early stages of understanding.
Do you know upgrading from what version?
I think they were following our Orbit release channels, so it would have been from whatever the last 4.x release was.
4.9 then.
Can't remember now.
So that means if they're using Orbit, then that's just going to be a direct binary drop-in with whatever stuff Orbit's doing under the hood. So you're not even using the MSIs.
That's right.
There were permission changes in the 4.9 series about the named pipes, but you shouldn't have seen that. That was in like 4.7 or 4.8 or something. Trail of Bits might remember.
Well, that's pretty much all the info I have to provide at the moment. So if I find out anything more, I'll certainly present that to the group.
So a thing I have seen is sometimes on hosts that update. It seems to happen on our Windows machines. Sometimes I haven't done a lot of debugging. Sometimes when launcher updates a Windows thing, we get like a new Windows machine. It's real hard to describe. I'm sorry. We see a new Windows enrollment request, and then the old Windows host suddenly starts spewing garbage data. So the Osquery WMI tables return -1 if it can't access underlying system APIs. That's just how it works. And what we'll see is the old host will start returning -1 for all the values, and we'll suddenly have a new host. And this is like real weird. It means like Osquery was like left in like half state and then I haven't debugged it. We just delete them.
Right.
But I don't know if you're bumping into anything like that. Maybe.
It's possible. Thanks for the thought. I have to get more info from the user and try to understand what's going on.
Well, any other announcements? Okay, next section is questions, issues, PRs. People want to discuss. The general intent here is to provide an open office hours section for any community members that happen to drop by. Sid, you're probably the only non-regular here. You got anything you want to bring up?
No, not really. I guess one question I have. Microsoft just released Windows 11. Has anyone tested Osquery on Windows 11? I have not, so I don't know.
Collide's got a handful of customers that are running Windows 11, and we haven't seen any issues yet. We haven't done any like really exhaustive testing, but there's a handful out there, and they all seem to work.
Cool.
Same with macOS 12 Monterey beta. Not done any exhaustive testing, but binary runs.
Yeah, same. We've got Monterey machines kicking around in our fleet as well. Probably somewhat related to macOS Monterey. I know Trail of Bits is working on Apple Silicon, so that's pretty cool. I imagine y'all don't have anything you want to say about that yet. We don't have a lot of
to the
agenda items today, so
I just added to the agenda whether we can discuss how to structure the PR for Apple Silicon, because it's a catch-22 situation where we don't have the CI yet for Apple Silicon. So do you want us to make per library updates and just keep them working on the platforms we do support?
So for other platforms that we don't really support, like Arch or even FreeBSD, right? What we've said to people is like, just make PRs. We can't test it in CI, but as long as they look clean and you don't break anything else, it's fine. And I think that's true here. I think that it seems easier to me to think about reviewing it on a per library basis, but if you guys want to like do it all en masse, that's probably not the end of the world either. But like if you put up a PR that said update this library to support, Apple Silicon, and like the diff looked reasonable, I think we would merge it. Like it would be fine, even though it's effectively dead code until it all comes in together.
Yeah, the same works for me.
We are touching the whole library, so even if you're not using part of the M1, the rest will work. We'll build, we'll configure.
Right, and that part will get tested.
Yeah, I think that my only concern is that I would like to have all the commits as with no interruption on master.
I think if you want all of the third-party libraries to be kind of in a line on master, then you're going to need to do it in one PR as opposed to splitting it. But that will make for a much larger PR to review. So that's kind of up to you.
Yeah.
I just take a note on this.
The other problem was that porting individual libraries isn't testable in itself. The first testable build will be the one where they're all ported.
I mean, whether you do a bunch of individual libraries and then discover you have to like clean up a couple things or just make one big PI, ultimately, I think we're cool with whatever. So maybe related to CI for this, I haven't really dug too deeply. One of the things I keep thinking about, though, is one of the really nice things about CI and builds is these sort of ephemeral VMs that we get from our providers, right? So we kind of know they mostly have a clean state each time. I feel like if I dropped a Silicon machine on my desk and hooked it up with a runner so that we were running CI, it would not have the same starting from fresh each time. And I'm wondering how people feel about that.
Maybe we can do something similar to what we have for Linux Arch.
Depends if we can actually do that. A lot of the VMs you can get for Apple Silicon have a 24-hour minimum lifetime. So if we got a Mac Stadium VM for Apple Silicon, we couldn't really reinstall it for every PR. You'd end up with like one long-lived VM with static configuration on it. And maybe we could move some of that ephemerality into Docker. I'm not totally sure here.
Yeah, I remember about the pricing that unless we have someone like pays for it or a special offer for open source project, I don't see us having M1 CI anytime soon.
Well, let's ignore paying for it for a moment. Let's assume we can do that. What I'm sort of getting at is I don't know. I feel like I don't know that there's anyone really doing. So like if you look at all our other CI, right? When the CI run starts, you get a worker, which is effectively on a brand new ephemeral node. It's true for the Macs, it's true for the x86, it's true for the ARM64 machines. At the end of the CI run, that node is destroyed. You get a new virtual machine. I'm a lot less sure how to replicate that on Apple Silicon.
Oh, actually, I thought we didn't have full ephemerality on the ARM64.
We do. At the beginning of an ARM64 run, it spawns a starts an EC2 node.
I see.
At the end of it, it destroys the EC2 node. So it's still ephemerality there. And I don't know how to get ephemerality for Apple Silicon right now. And I don't know if the CI system itself can sort of build ephemerality on a non-ephemeral host.
Can we use like a non-ephemeral host and then just use a new ephemeral one when we're going to cut a release?
I mean, I shrug because I don't know. Like, it's probably somewhat human intensive, is my guess. Mac Stadium, I think, will give us M1 machines, but there's there's probably a minutes to hours lead on that, and then there's those machines have a minimum lifetime of 24 hours, at least a minimum billable lifetime of 24 hours.
Mac Stadium has a product called Orca, which they advertise as takes standard macOS VM, puts it in the Docker container, spin up virtual machine in seconds with any version of macOS, and orchestrate them together. And they also doing Kubernetes, and they market it as it's built on genuine Apple hardware, and suitable for any workload that requires macOS.
That might
be
work.
Worth exploring.
I guess I wonder. Do you think that Kubernetes or Docker provides enough ephemerality and isolation?
Wasn't Docker a VM on macOS?
It has its own hypervisor of sorts, hypervisor framework.
Seth, when you say enough isolation, what are you referring to? Like, what is the concern, or do we need to define what the concern is?
More the latter. What do we think we want in terms of security isolation, build cleanliness?
Yeah.
I
think that security isolation is the most important for the releases, and I think build cleanliness is an important and convenient property, but something that we can sacrifice if it's not very feasible for our CI runs. We can't sacrifice it for our releases. That'd be my read of the situation.
Mm-hmm. The other part here is CI and builds are all in the same workflows. So there isn't, strictly speaking, a separation there.
Could we split them out essentially by just copying what the steps are?
Yeah, it's just, work and plumbing.
Okay, yeah. And did we move to GitHub Actions successfully? Is that where we're at now?
Yeah, we've been on GitHub Actions for a little bit. We got some pings from the Cirrus CI folks, which might be a thing that's interesting to look at. Instead of GitHub Actions, partly they've got better support for ARM64. They're kind of neat looking, but I haven't had the time to really sink my teeth into it. They both support YAML and whatever the Google derived Python configuration language is, Starlink, Star something, Starlark. It's a bunch of kind of neat stuff, but there's work there. So I don't know if maybe orc is enough.
And did we already decide that cross compilation for M1 is not possible, or did we already find that that's not possible?
We are going to use it. However, we want to be able to run the test binaries we compile.
So I mean, I feel like if we have capabilities to have a clean ephemeral environment for each build and each PR, and it's only the testing of those binaries that needs to happen on the non-ephemeral M1, then I feel much more comfortable about that.
That could be workable. I wonder how the build time is on a cross compilation. How are y'all testing this? Just running locally on M1 machines?
I
Sort of local.
personally don't have an M1 machine, so I'm cross-compiling. And then
We have a shared M1 machine.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by local.
Yeah.
But yeah, we haven't yet been able to run Osquery on M1, so yeah, we are not really testing it on M1 yet. Although we have done other tests to check that the cross compilation works fine.
What would it be like getting cross compilation poured into our build pipeline?
you mean full cross-compilation or platforms?
Kind of whatever you think makes sense here.
Yeah, I don't think I ever tried something like that.
You mean like starting from which platform, Linux, and build for Windows and macOS for macOS?
Probably
like that?
Mac OS x86 for Mac OS Silicon. Like I don't think it's going to be feasible to target Mac OS from Linux.
Oh no, sure. So yeah, I was saying Linux for Linux and Windows, and then macOS for macOS, right?
Something like that. I mean, we have a okay Windows build answer, so I don't know that we need it there. But I'm sort of thinking about Zach's suggestion of how can we ensure clean builds?
Well, I'm not sure we have a problem right now on the Windows side, so I would say that only macOS has to be dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, and it sounds to me like the main question is how do we deal with the cleanliness of the hygiene of the M1 Mac builds. And
But
if we
right now
can
it's
cross-compile
built-
those, and then we can take advantage of the same hygiene that we have for other things, and then if we can get the artifact over to even a not clean M1 machine to run the tests, I'll say again that seems quite reasonable to me.
Yeah, makes sense. Also, something like that I was going to. So we have opened sometime back an issue about updating our macOS runner to Big Sur, since now it is available for everyone basically. And I have added a comment about what we envisioned for after the M1 port, and the idea, especially for Big Sur, sorry, confusing, starting again. The idea was actually to have Catalina and Big Sur, but to build on Big Sur and only test on Catalina. So for this means that we have to change the workflow and the logic so that we can take all the test binaries and copy them to Catalina VM. And this same logic then can be used for an M1 machine eventually.
Sounds right. Sounds like work.
Put a link in the chat with the issue 7325.
Would that something be like test data, like we have for package data? right? The same idea.
So
Could be
my
cool.
guess is it would be a little bit easier because we don't have to shove it into the releases. That would just be something kind of as an artifact that gets picked up
Artifact.
as other artifact stages.
Cool.
So do we have a runner for M1 from GitHub Actions that can be used?
Not yet.
So how are we going to, like, I don't think we can download artifacts without logging in or having a token, or like it's going to be a problem to share data between GitHub and the custom runner for M1.
We might be able to have a runner from GitHub. I don't know.
Wasn't that in like Ruby maybe, or some other scripting language?
The GitHub runners are written in .NET
Oh, okay, I remember now. Yeah, you're right.
with like a bash layer on top of it or something horrific.
Oh, Sandro, is you're concerned about how to get the artifacts from the GitHub hosted runner where they're built into the M1 runner that's going to be somewhere else that needs to run the tests?
Yeah, we may have to upload those artifacts somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, if we have to, we put them in an S3 bucket or something. But I think there's also, like, the self-hosted runners also have tokens that may give them access to the same artifacts. No, Seth?
No, they should know. The self-hosted runners recently gained ephemeral support, which actually gives us more options than we had a year ago when we were looking at this for the ARM64 stuff. So this is good, but doesn't totally solve all our problems. So self-hosted runners may in fact now be a reasonable choice again.
I think whether it has to be S3 or we can actually use the GitHub Actions artifact store, I think either of those seems quite viable to me. It's probably gonna be work with either. Hopefully not a tremendous amount of work.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking how you actually wake up. So let's say you have the M1 binaries built, you have to run them. How do you actually wake up the hosted machine on the other side?
So the way, I mean, there's two things we can do, right? The way this works for the ARM64s is it only runs on a merge to master, and the merges to master have access to additional keying material that then spin up those jobs. So that's one strategy that could work. It's sort of inherently a little bit of a limited strategy, but it's an okay band-aid. Another strategy would be to figure out how to use the ephemeral runners, which now exist. So those do give us a little bit better of a security context, but we still have to kind of work through some of the how do we keep a CI job from sort of compromising an underlying host. And some of that may be suitable with Docker or Kubernetes isolation. I should try and understand the Mac Stadium Orca. I feel like I can't speak to whether that would meet our needs here or not. I feel like I also should really try and understand if moving to something like Cirrus CI is going to be better for us, or if sticking with GitHub is a better bet.
Well, I'm not super familiar with the self-hosted actions, but I know you can dispatch one workflow from another one. So if you need a workflow if you need like a separate workflow to use the self-hosted runner, I don't know if you can have different jobs within the same workflow that use different runners.
It gets real weird. So you can dispatch workflows from workflows, but doing that requires crossing permission boundaries in ways that is a little bit poorly documented. So CI jobs run. So we would like CI jobs, which come from untrusted users, to effectively run in a very low privileged environment, which means they cannot dispatch jobs into a high trust environment. That's just not the way GitHub built it. So there isn't like a hook for this was successful, pick it up over here now. I don't think. I might be wrong because they change this stuff all the time. So like there's a bunch of weird stuff. So the way the runners work by registering themselves with the GitHub central core and then the GitHub Central Core dispatches into runners based on kind of the job specifications. So it would be reasonable to create, if we had the ability to create an ephemeral M1 node that ran our GitHub self-hosted runner code in its run once ephemeral mode, which now exists as of a month ago, it would kind of be reasonable to do all these things. But there's a lot of ifs there, so there's kind of a lot of like DevOpsy glue work to happen to make that
One
work.
of the issues I could see in trying to dispatch workers like that is there is really no dependency tracking, let's say, between jobs that are started manually by dispatching them. So you can end up exhausting your, for example, 10 workers and then have them all wait for another worker that will never start. So I guess it's different if we have a self-hosted runner where we can maybe change this. But I think it will not work on the GitHub runners.
There's just kind of a lot there that we haven't done.
In terms of waiting on a runner that will never start, like if this is a final step, can we kind of and this is the only lock, if you will, that needs to be acquired, like can we get away with the fact that like something is going to acquire this quote lock or like the ability to run the job on a runner, and eventually that should complete or time out and then let the next job get started?
So I think it depends on how we start the job. If it is just a normal job inside the workflow, the dependency is going to work correctly. We will not have locking issues. But if we use the REST APIs to dispatch a workflow manually, then we will have this issue. So if we have full integration, it's not going to be a problem, I think.
By the way, I'm just looking at the GitHub self-hosted runners page right now, and they do not list ARM support for macOS.
Yeah, they don't have it. They're official, having just read the GitHub issue about this approximately 5 minutes ago. They do not have official ARM support for the self-hosted runners. There's an unofficial branch where someone says it works. The official answer is they're waiting for .NET to have ARM support, have M1 support, which is due at the end of the year. This may or may not matter depending on how the Docker shenanigans work. Like, I just don't know. Because like you could maybe run the runner under Rosetta as long as it was correctly calling to M1 code. Like, I don't know. I said there's DevOps glue work that I haven't done on this, and every time I go and poke the GitHub runners, it's just like it's a .NET morass, and I get really sad.
Okay.
So I try not to. .NET is not a language I write code in. Yeah, it's like a long way of saying I don't know if we've got good options, but I'm happy to merge M1 code before it's in CI. We just can't necessarily officially support it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say the same. Happy to merge the code as long as the existing CI passes, and we can release M1 support as beta or whatever we need to do until we can sort out this issue.
We can at least test that the code is building correctly for M1, and we can also generate binaries, so that's at least something. So for the time being, we can maybe just, test the binaries manually before each release.
Totally.
It's not great, but
it's the same thing we did for ARM64 until we got a better answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully every day that goes by gets us closer to having some better hosted offerings for M1 support on CI.
It's a nice theory, Zach. Here we are sometime later, and we still don't have fabulous Arch64 support for hosted CI yet, so...
Yeah.
This is about everything on our agenda. I've got a question for the crowd if people don't have other things. So I recently discovered that we can probably extract NTLM hashes out of the registry with some Byzantine C or whatever else logic. How do we feel about that? Do we feel like that, like a table that exposed NTLM hashes, would that be privacy impacting? Do we like that? Is that bad? I don't know.
It's probably not the only way to get them. I mean, I guess the file table could get them. Too.
Yeah.
We can't get it out of the file table. Well, maybe. It's weird. So NTLM hashes are stored. This is like some incredibly Byzantine peak Microsoft obfuscation. There is an encryption key split and stored in two different parts of the registry, which the SAM hive is then encrypted using with some incredibly weird 15-step process. So you can't really just read them out of everything, but if you can get at the underlying registry, then you can kind of do stuff. And all of this gets like locked in RAM, so only something running with appropriate admin permissions can read it. It all feels very weird to me from my security perspective. There's just this incredible layering of weird, like split this string into halves and then like rearrange them and then like encrypt them and then like take this other nonce from over here. And it's weird. But I can't decide if we think it would be reasonable to stick that in a table or not. I started working on a POC somewhere, but haven't finished it.
What would be a use case for it?
You could detect if someone has an empty password or if there's password reuse happening because the NTLM hashes aren't seeded.
Same. Okay.
I think we exposed the Linux hashes, right, in the shadow table?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, it seems likely that we do. I'd be curious what Alexander thinks on this one. He's been looking at a lot of Windows forensics.
Yeah, I mean, so in regards to like the NTLM hash exposure, I think Osquery exposes a lot of other sensitive information. You can get a list of users, you can get a list of processes, you can do a bunch of queries on the OS. So it exposes a lot of information. It's just one of the side effects of something of exposing the registry. Yes, you can query NTLM hashes. Again, it requires admin access, so you have to have admin. I believe you need admin access to query the registry. Maybe not, but even if a user can do that, they already have admin. You can query it other ways. But yeah, it's just a side effect. As far as making another table, I mean, if others want it, I'm not against it. But is there no other way to check to see if the account has an empty password?
I'm not aware of one. Yeah, other than
just so the use case is to check whether there is password reuse, whether there is someone with an empty password. But what else can you do with that? You can get the hashes, get a rainbow table, and just brute force it.
My understanding is that modern NTLM hashes are relatively hard to brute force. I might be wrong. So there's there's version 1 and version 2, and version 1's been deprecated for a while. Those ones were especially weak.
Yeah.
The other thing
they are
is
secure for now, at least. But
for now,
you never know. So is there any other way to obtain the same information?
Absolutely. We could imagine. I could imagine just bubbling up whether the password is empty, because those are known hash strings. And I feel like we have something similar. I can't find it in our schema right now.
I was mentioning that in the shadow, there's no hash exposed. We have only, I'm not sure exactly what it maps to, but we have a password status. among other informations like the length, the expiration, etc.
So maybe better not to expose NTLM then, or the full hashes.
Yeah, I would.
I wouldn't,
away
as
from
they
it.
would end up stored forever inside loggers. And if at some point you can brute force them, you're going to have clear text passwords everywhere.
Maybe it'd be reasonable to just expose this as either a Boolean for whether it's the empty thing, or I kind of wonder about wonder if it's reasonable to expose a hash of the hash. I don't know yet. Sort of thinking about, is there a way to look for password reuse? Is exposing a hash of the hash terrible or not?
Maybe you can have a dictionary somewhere as a configuration that you can push, and then you have a Boolean that tells you whether there is a match or not.
I mean, I could put that in a where clause too, right? Like, does it match any of these things and cross join the table?
That's true, but aren't you going to have to report the row hashes from the
Yeah, I guess you're right. I have to think harder about that. It could be in the table generation code though, but that doesn't let you compare cross machine. I have to think about that.
Yeah, I mentioned a dictionary because it is. I would also even maybe put a delay so that you can't So trying to avoid a select where you can just try until you have a match.
Mm-hmm. Writing down our little summary of what we're saying.
Is there no security policy that lets you enforce password settings? I believe so.
I'm so glad you asked.
Yeah, can you query for that
So
setting?
for all of the major operating systems that I'm familiar with, you can, with some work, query password policy settings, but none of that actually tells you if the existing passwords are in compliance with the set policy. So if the set policy is, for example, enacted after the last time the password was changed, then the password is not going to be in compliance with the security policy. There is no way to verify it because these are all one-way operations.
Yeah, but is there a way to check when the password was last set?
Maybe it gets real weird if you start thinking about like policy overlays. I'd have to review the internal collide notes on it, but roughly there's no good way to check. You can sort of check policy, and then you can like kind of make some guesses about whether or not a given password complies with the policy based on, when was the password last changed. But there's no authoritative answer there.
There might be private APIs. I know macOS has a private API to check for that on OpenShift.
For when a password has been changed, or for whether it complies with the current set of policies.
So not the complies, whether a password is alphanumeric, all that. So there's a little bit of enum where, yeah. But I don't think I think it's a private API. I'll have to double check.
Was there space for a table that could expose a few different things about like account security on Windows? Maybe one being like, is auto logon enabled? One column being is auto logon enabled, another column being is the password empty, and like
there's probably space. I think we probably fish a lot of that out of the registry, would be my guess. So I'm kind of exploring other things right now. I don't know where I'm going with it.
I think there's been discussion about this in the past, but I personally endorse more tables that just basically do a thin wrapper around the registry. I know there was some objection to that, in the past from Youssef. Yeah. And there were some things that folks wanted to do. I can't remember what the context was. But I think that's probably useful to end users of Osquery.
I don't think I've ever blocked any, but I do feel real hesitant on doing things that are very thin wrappers over existing tools, because I feel like part of the things that I've seen in our time in Collide, my time here at Collide, is that when we ship a table that's like a thin wrapper over something else, in all likelihood, the something else is going to change. And then we have this like table API that's baked in already, and much harder for me to change a table definition than to change the underlying query definition. So I've really shifted much closer to being able to say, just to update the query definition, right? And like, well, this OS, you want this registry key, that OS, you want that registry key. So
I think it maybe becomes a question of like, who needs to be responsible for dealing with these kind of updates? Like, is it Osquery for developers, or is it individual end users? And it's certainly convenient for us to say it should be the end users, but
I mean, I agree that the counterpoint is that it's really nice to be able to say, just select star from blah and get like these nice ready formed answers back. But so much of the time I just find exactly what that ready formed answer means is highly contextual and apt to change. So it's like an easy trap, which is why all of the Collide tables have gone in this like completely bonkers. Here you get impossible to use EAV data. Go and write a query.
The approach I've taken to determine whether or not a registry data is worth as a separate table, if you need to do any like a timestamp, translations or like conversions. So for example, like the Office MRU table lists recently opened documents, and that contains a timestamp. That timestamp needs to be converted to Unix epoch. Versus the movie cache table, which is an artifact of execution. It's completely plain text, and you can just query it using the normal registry table. It could be nice to have a select all from movie cache. And you could easily just make a custom query from the plain registry table to get that data.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if there's an interesting route here to play with views, like as an end user.
Yeah, Steph, I was thinking the same thing. Like, would building views into Osquery, like in a similar way to how we build packs, be like something useful to help, kind of give something a little bit higher level than the primitives? But are we then implying a same level of support that you were discussing, not wanting to have?
That's actually a really interesting thought experiment, because I think if we did it as views, then you give end sites the ability to override and change them around. And I'd love to see more view use inside Osquery. I think that's a really untapped area. But I think if we do ship it, then it becomes the same kind of, oh, well, you shipped me this thing and it's out of date. And you're like, but like, maybe there's just space for blog posts here, right? Like if someone wrote a blog post of like, here's how you get this this pseudo table out of a view, there's space for it to become a little stale and people to update it and people to go get Google rankings. So I feel like there's an interesting thing there for that.
Yeah, I'm with you there.
Yeah, I wish we could instantiate views from the query packs. So you have a scope.
You want to PR it?
One or more views, and then you run queries against them. And once the queries are done, the view disappears.
You want to PR it?
Alessandro, why does the view need to disappear?
Because the use case there is to prevent users from copying and pasting the same queries over and over again when trying different things.
Can you say more?
But like, I guess like, what if the views are just globally scoped? Do they need to be scoped to a query pack?
So the idea here is not to remove the global views, but to have a way. So let's say you had an imperative language, you would create functions. So you, of course, cannot create functions in SQL, but if you had a way to tell your scope, create a temporary view that ties together some things that you want to work with, and then remove it, then you can collapse multiple queries to have a shorter and tidier query pack.
But why not just leave the global view instantiated?
Because maybe it's not useful to have it forever. Maybe it's useful to have it just for this small scope.
But is it harmful?
Depends on the name you're going to use. If it is temporary, then there's no. It is easier to enforce that it's not going to conflict with other views created in the query pack.
Well, I'm not sure. Depends on implementation details, I think, because if you had a view, like I think SQLite views are inherently global. So if we talked about, I don't know what it would look like if we talked about scoping one, or if we just talked about adding hooks to create and destroy it. But if you talked about creating and destroying it, you still might have to worry about name collisions, unless you basically always added some kind of random Nancy factor to it. And you could imagine, like, don't we do something with query names where like they're hierarchical based on the pack and configuration, or is that just by convention? So you could imagine doing something like that for views, where view names are sort of namespaced down, which is just like prepend by prepending strings. So I feel like if we're worried about making name conflicts less likely, that feels like a different set of remediations. And if we're worried about like downsides of leaving a view created, and people have occasionally said things about the secure not wanting to leak what the queries are to potential attackers who are trolling the Osquery schedule, which feels overblown to me personally, but maybe first responders feel differently on that. So I don't know if there's a downside to leaving a view instantiated.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe instantiating a new temporary database for that query.
That seems a lot harder.
Well, the API is not, the SQLite API is not so hard to use. No, I'm not really sure if there are complexities that, from Osquery itself that make it super hard to implement.
I mean, and scheduled queries do run serially. So in theory, you could just, before a scheduled query that was supposed to have those views, you could run the create view statements, and then you could run the query, and then you could run the drop view. So from a technical perspective, it doesn't seem unreasonable to me, but I'd argue if we think that there's like some utility to be had to views here, like why not start with the simplest mechanism for doing that? Like perhaps by allowing, to load up views in a similar way you do with query packs, and then just see how much people use them and whether a need emerges for some more specific scoping.
I think that'd be really cool if someone just wanted to start playing around and seeing where we evolved it to. I don't know. I'm suddenly excited about replacing all the registry tables with views.
Yeah, I'm excited about the prospects of something like this as well.
What like, is there a downside to letting people query it? Like, it seems kind of interesting to ship a view. Like, are there times you would want to ship a view that was available to scheduled queries, but not to distributed queries?
I don't think so. I mean, it's the same data.
What would be a case where you want to have it accessible from one side and not the other?
I don't have one. That's why I was asking.
I think it's an interesting question. I can't come up with any reason like that. I feel like ultimately, if you're interested in like doing permissions on queries, it probably needs to be on like a per table basis. And so then you need to take into account which tables are being accessed through the view.
I think the SQL should just do that for you, though, because they're not materialized views, right? They're just the runtime.
I think a view would basically just be kind of substituted like a template by the query planner, but I haven't looked.
I don't know.
How much interest there is for permissions, per table permissions? Like, and I know that everyone talks about it, but I'm wondering whether people would actually use it.
I'm with you. It's something that I've thought about for years that could be interesting, but I haven't seen any strong demand for that.
Same. I've like thought about it, but I haven't seen anyone really ask for it. Like, I don't know what a nice implementation would look like. So it's the kind of thing that seems fun, but I don't know what a good implementation would feel like. I don't know where it would get used yet.
I mean, we are within Fleet working on permissions for which queries various kinds of users can run against different sets of hosts within the infrastructure. People seem to be interested in that, and no one seems to be looking for the level of granularity to define on a per table basis.
So at Collide, we do a couple of things. So Collide is trying to be fairly privacy conscious. So Collide blocks a variety of tables at the SAS level. So they're still enabled in Osquery, but K2 won't let you query them. And some of those are configured by Collide, and some of them are configured by the customer. And some of them we ship as disallowed, but I'll let you allow them if you wanted to. So we have a couple of things like that. And then we basically enforce that via, we parse all the SQL strings and then deny them if they hit a blocked table.
Yeah, I guess the major users for this feature would be both of you.
Yeah, like no one's asked for a stronger answer than that. And at least for Collide, there are relatively few the number of people that have access to the administrative interface is very small. So, most people at a company can't issue distributed queries anyhow, and the ones that can are generally going to full permissions there. So it's a little bit.
Yeah, and I'd say at Fleet, what we actually have it as a large goal is to try to get more people within the organization to have some level of access to the data from Osquery, which means providing different roles that have different levels of access.
I guess I'll say we do at this point have end users at this point have access to the data that we collect on their machine, but they do not have the ability to issue queries. So it's a very simple read-only view. That's all I got on agenda. It's my sprawling discussion item. We're about at time. Any last comments from people?
I have 5 PRs open. Alessandro's, sorry, just want to bring this up again. But Alessandro's been great, providing some great feedback for the Amcache and registry parsing PR. But if anyone has time or is interested in looking at any of the other 4, that'd be great. I would like to get some of them merged so I can learn from what I've done, and then start working on some other stuff. But if anyone has time or is interested, I believe that those 4 others.
So we talked a little about updating the guidelines for new pull request. And the next step was to also talk about the pros and cons of the implementation we have there. And I guess the most important question is whether it increases the attack surface of Osquery. And if it increases the maintenance significantly for the maintainers when merging something. So for the registry, raw registry access, I was actually going to ask Seth, Zach, and the other if they have maybe some time to actually scope it better and decide how to proceed.
I think you were asking a question to me. If you could follow up on chat on that.
Yeah, okay.
I do have to run. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
I'm not sure I understood the question there. Are you just saying at the point in time you put up a suggested set of contributor guidelines, you would like feedback? Or was there something more?
That, and also the problem with the raw registry table, and the reason we're not merging it yet, is manifold. The first issue is something we can maybe fix by updating pull request, and is the fact that the table will attempt to look up all the devices attached in the system.
Real quick, I fixed that. It's by default looks up. Sorry, just real quick, I fixed that. It's only looking up the original, I guess core, the first device, with the option of specifying another one if the user wants to, but it doesn't do that anymore. Sorry.
I see. And then the fact that we have to, since we cannot read the file directly, we have to basically parse the GPT or MS-DOS header, then the partitions, and then parse the file system manually to read the data. And then on top of that, we have the registry hive to parse.
Sorry, just real quick. When you say MS-DOS, I believe the sleuth kit is doing that for us. So the PR doesn't, it's only parsing the registry file. It's not parsing anything else. It's just the registry. So there's no like DOS parsing or anything.
Yeah, that is true. But the problem there is that we are still running that code. Whether it is written by us or not, we are still running that code. Now, the original problem was that it is super easy to exploit it if you can attach a device on the physical machine. Now, this seems to have been fixed, but we are still exercising that code. And the sleuth kit code was not written to be used in a high permissions daemon running all the time. So the goals of the two projects, Osquery and the TSK library, don't really align.
We're talking about the Mcache PR, right?
Yeah.
Is there so this PR, as described, adds in Mcache parsing and raw registry access. Is there a reason those two are in one PR?
In order to access the Mcache, you have to parse the registry. Mcache is a separate Mcache registry file, and there's no API exposed to it. So in order to even read it, you have to parse a registry file essentially. And the raw registry parsing was made for Mcache, but since it's also valuable as a separate table, it's a separate table as well. It's basically it's a registry parsing table that has basically two tables, Mcache and a raw registry.
So I guess that my only concern is that we are running quite a lot of code by passing even the file system driver.
I agree. That sounds concerning. I don't feel like I have an answer, but I agree. That feels like it is making our attack footprint and our maintenance burden quite a lot higher. So I don't know how to address that.
I just want to follow up comment, sorry. For the sleuth kit, it's used by many commercial companies, many security companies, in both the forensic tools and EDR platforms. It's used on both, so it's not like, at least in my opinion, Osquery is not like the only piece of software that's using the sleuth kit as a part of the agent package. Many companies, commercial and maybe even open source, use the sleuth kit, deploying it to many systems. I think so. It's definitely not like it's not a small unknown forensic tool. It's been battle tested, in my opinion, many times.
I guess the problem is the use case that is different. We're not saying that the library is not high quality, but that the goals of the projects are different. And actually, I had one solution. Seth was mentioning a really good thing, I believe, creating an official, you look puzzled, an official forensic extension.
I say a lot of things, so
Well, most of the time, they are really good.
Yeah, I don't know if it would be interesting to think about what would it be like to ship an official forensics extension. Would we have the same problem where we're like, oh, I don't know, could we ship this, or is it still making our attack footprint too big? I don't have an answer. I just feel like it's an interesting discussion question.
So I believe it is easier to try to contain the extension than it is to try to implement sandboxing right now directly inside the Osquery.
I got nothing. I'm sorry. I feel like SleuthKit should have a nice big discussion about their security stance and what they do. But I don't see it on their homepage immediately.
Well, it is primarily a suite of forensic tools. So most of the time they are used like one shot, you run them, get the output. And most of the time you just use them like maybe not on the live system right away.
Yeah, like Alessandro said, it's a forensic suite that lets you, from most systems, it works on a lot of systems with Windows, lets you like carve files out if you're on a live system. So if you want to carve, a registry file, you can't use the existing carve table since the file is locked. So, you could use the sleuth kit, carve it from a live system. You can get the file name timestamps.
So
it provides a lot of value.
I understand the value of these systems. What I mean is SleuthKit sounds like a thing that is designed to operate in a potentially compromised environment to gather forensics data, which makes me think it should really have a fairly strong stance towards dealing with untrusted or malicious input. So I'm a little bit surprised that I don't easily see a list of what is their security policy and what are they doing to minimize risk and what is their fuzzing and what are the CVEs that have been associated with them and anything like that. So it feels like an odd gap for something that is probably running in a hostile environment.
I think we have to look at the problem a different way. It's a problem about boundaries. If you were to exploit a command line tool, it may not ideal, but it is different than exploiting a long-lived process with admin privileges.
Yeah. Yes.
So the security stance on a command line tool is different compared to security stance of a daemon. So even if there's what is the worst you can do if you compromise a command line tool that usually runs as normal user?
Introduce a backdoor.
Yeah, compared to like a daemon.
introduce a backdoor.
Yeah. So again, I'm not saying that it's not high quality code, but that the security requirements do not align.
I'm not sure what you mean by security requirements. You mentioned command line tool, but SleuthKit is also a library. I'm not 100% sure on the specifics of the command line tool, but I think they just use the library. So if there's a vulnerability in the command line tool, there might not be a vulnerability. It's in the command line tool and possibly not in the library.
No, I mean that the command line tool uses a library. The library was written for the command line tools.
So it would be a vulnerability in the library then.
Yeah, and we would inherit it if we use it that way in Osquery.
Okay, but I feel like, then if that happens, the SleuthKit I assume would get patched, like all the other libraries Osquery uses, we would find out, or an issue would be created, a PR could be made to then update the library and adjust the vulnerability.
Well, sure, but I think Alessandro is saying, or at least what I would hear, and the thing I say is SleuthKit is inherently dealing with more untrusted data. It is inherently higher risk than many of the other third-party libraries we have.
Okay.
It doesn't mean it's bad or wrong. Just, a library that's designed to read raw registry files and, goes about trying to read them off of disk is almost certainly going to do, be somewhat higher risk than something like the Kafka adapter.
Sure.
So, I'm sorry, I don't have a strong opinion right now about something like raw registry access and SleuthKit.
Again, I guess one of the reasons why this table, in my opinion, would be valuable. And again, of course, the forensics, but I think the current registry table, it's been mentioned, it's only used, you can only get data from users that are logged on. So if a user logs off, you can't get that registry data, and that affects a bunch of other tables that query that user registry hives. So if an attacker creates an account, uses that account, logs off, no one uses it ever again, you won't be able to query that. Or if an account logs onto a system, a compromised account logs onto a system, does stuff, logs off, that account's never used again, you won't be able to see that data. And the Mcache is not exposed in the API. Mcache contains a huge amount of valuable data, I think, and could be very valuable. And finally, the registry, from a forensic investigation, in order to do a thorough investigation, you need, in my opinion, in general, 3 minimum things, a full file listing, a full registry listing, and all the event logs. Right now, Osquery can do a little bit of that, but, raw registry, in order to get all the core registry files, you need to be able to access the registry files for users that aren't logged on and stuff like that. So, in my opinion, that's just one of the requirements. I think a lot of forensic, thorough investigation, EDR type tools, they get this full registry listing, which will let you eventually, let you do a timeline and do other stuff. But in order to do that, you need a large amount of data, and the raw registry table, it can help with that, I think.
I think we all see the value of the data you can get with it. The concern is with implementation.
Sure, and again, I'm willing to work with others to make sure, the implementation is correct. If that means, writing more tests, working the PR up, rewriting it using a third-party library, or, some other method, I'm willing to work with anyone to address concerns, hopefully.
My personal concern is not your code, but mostly the amount of code that we are running to even get to the data that the table is going to parse. Like I made an example some time ago about, let me think about it. Yeah, let's talk about the registry or even the NetFS structure. How sturdy and reliable is this implementation? Are we sure that bulk form data is not going to block Osquery for whatever reason, with infinite loops or crashes or things that we cannot control because it is outside the table code? And is there a different way to obtain the data we need? Because so with SilkKit, we are going to have to parse the partition table and then for system looking for files. Is there a different way to do that? Like maybe trying to see if there's a way to create a temporary interactive session for the user we need to read so that his registry hives are going to appear in the namespace. That would be easier, and because we would just have to use the Windows APIs, and we only have to adhere to the documentation, and we'll be sure we not get parser exploits.
Sure. I guess from a non-forensic perspective, yep, I think that could work definitely. I think ideally, if you're using Osquery forensics for forensic purposes, ideally you don't modify the system. Of course, registry writes logs and stuff, and that modifies the system. But ideally, triggering, a user session to log on, that's going to change, last logon timestamps or last logon event. It's going to probably trigger maybe event logs. So that could, that could change quite a few artifacts. And again, from a forensics perspective, if you're doing investigation on a system that's compromised, ideally, it's sometimes not possible, but you can't really trust the OS APIs. If there's malware on the system, again, it's not always guaranteed, but you can't really trust the API. I think if you're investigating a system from a forensic perspective. Ideally.
That is true, but if that is the concern, usually forensic is performed on a dead system that is not being booted up.
Yep. That is a possibility, correct? But again, if you're doing it at scale, 1,000 systems in scope, dead box forensic doesn't really scale that well, I think.
It doesn't, but you risk damaging your data. The way I would approach this would be to use a dedicated Linux distro, there are, that makes sure that you can mount the disk read-only. And then, if you want, you can have Osquery on top of it. So you're still not using the operating system on disk. It is rather unusual to do forensic on a live system that way because you risk altering the data anyway. Like even just mounting the file system is going to change it.
Yep. Again, I think that there are many tools out there, like Velociraptor, Carbon Black, CrowdStrike. They have these EDR capabilities that let you do these live forensics analysis on disk across thousands of systems. So it is possible to do forensics on a live system, pulling full file listing, pulling all the event logs, registries, and maybe some modification occurs. Ideally, it's going to be really, really minimum. But of course, I can't guarantee. You can't guarantee nothing will change.
I think there's some amount of talking in circles here, and I do not think we are going to solve this today with this graph.
If you'd like to write my small child, I accept
but a
a
little
very
bit,
reasonable rate.
What I think is happening is Alessandro and myself and probably other people are generally leery of pulling in a large number of libraries dealing with untrusted data. There's attack surface, there's maintenance burden. I think that is inherent. I don't know that anyone disagrees with that. And similarly, there's interest in gaining more visibility using Osquery. What can we see? How can we read it? How can we get better forensics? I'm not sure there's much disagreement there either. Everyone sees the value. And then I think there's some debate or disagreement about, well, is SleuthKit safe to link? How do we answer that question? And I don't even feel like we know how we answer whether we're comfortable linking to sleuthkit. So it makes these questions hard about, do we, for something like raw registry access, okay, there's obviously value there and there's obviously some risk there. And how do we evaluate which of those, and how do we even make that decision? I don't feel like we have an answer to that.
Okay. No worries. Just small clarification. Just to clarify, I think sleuthkit's already being linked to Osquery. So
Yeah,
for
we
other
already have
tables,
Oh,
it's already included.
sure,
we don't
okay.
use as much features yet.
But feed more data through is still different risk. So I don't know.
Yeah,
Like I
that's
think
true.
I don't know how to evaluate that. Like I see a question and I don't know an answer, and I don't even know criteria for an answer. And I kind of wonder, like, is part of the answer, how do we decide whether something is adequately fuzzed in the real world, and thus whether we consider it safe, or what do we consider safe to link to, or how would we make that decision? Because that lets us maybe try and answer something without getting into, well, is this worth it or not worth it? Instead saying like, well, what's our comfort level with this? I don't know if that helps answer the question.
Like, I usually think about it if it is a system artifact that we can normally get it through APIs, then we should of course get it. If it is something that we cannot do without, like packages, like there's a lot of stuff inside librpm, libdeb, but there's not really much we can do about it. We have to use it.
But
Forensic data seems interesting, but it's different. It's an extra.
well, there's the question of how do we navigate that? And I don't have an answer. Someone proposed, like, what would it be like if we had a command line that turned on all the forensic support versus not? Does that matter? Would anyone actually run with it turned off? So I don't know. But we are about 20 minutes over, so.
Should we call it?
Yeah.
I think so, probably. Thank you all. Alexandra, thank you for continuing to raise the thorny question that this is.
Happy to.
All right. Well, see you guys later.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.